Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk, and sometimes UK Astrologer. And you can also find me on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is maryenglish.co.uk. Done. So there we go. Now, this week, I have had a message, and it says, "Hi Mary, I was thinking if you've ever covered a podcast on the 8th house Saturn return, and if it's always doom and gloom, aka people dying, or if it can be rebirth and death within oneself soon. I've got the start of mine coming up this year in Mayish time, before it retrogrades back into Pisces, before returning to Aries in 2026. A little bit apprehensive about it." And she's also asked, because I said, oh yes, I'll cover that for you. She said, also what Saturn in Aries will be like. So we've got two questions here, really. One of which is, what is Saturn return like? A lot of people that get into astrology get very concerned about their first Saturn return if they've never had one before, and we're going to be using Erin Sullivan's lovely book, Saturn in Transit, Boundaries of Mind, Body and Soul. And we'll also cover what is Saturn going to be like when it finally, every planet is finally, when it gets into the sign of Aries, how will things be then? Now, because somebody has asked a question that is specific for their chart, I think it's only fair that I cover their particular chart and what it's like, so that you that are listening at home or on the bus or on the train or wherever it is you're listening to can imagine in your mind how this will affect this particular person. And I have to apologise to someone else who's written into me that's given me some feedback that too often I'm telling you to go to the show notes to actually look at the chart and then fail to describe the chart to you. And it's a fair point, and I take it on board, and thank you very much for the feedback. And as I've said numerous times to people that live listening on YouTube, you're not even going to see the charts, because there's no way for my podcast provider to be able to share those charts. So the person concerned, so I won't give you their date of birth, because obviously we've got patient confidentiality to take into account. And I'm calling the person Lion because they have a Leo ascendant. And the ascendant is 26 degrees into Leo, and it's a late degree into Leo. So when looking at the chart, it's the houses aren't all of the sign. Are all of the sign, but there's only a little bit of the sign prior to that. So just to describe what that looks like. So when you've got a chart using equal house that has a late degree ascendant of more than 25 degrees, when you look at each house, you're going to see the majority of that house is the next sign. So even though this person has a Leo ascendant, the majority of their first house, so let's do the maths on it. Hold on, she's got a 24 degree ascendant. Sorry, a 26 degree ascendant. Means there's only 4 degrees of Leo in her first house and 26 degrees in the sign of Virgo, and all the way round. So each house, when you're just casually looking at it, doesn't look, even though it's Leo ascendant, each house is going to take up the next sign. Does that make sense? So when you've got an ascendant that is more than 25 degrees, each house is going to take a chunk of one sign and a small amount of another sign, because of the maths of it, that there's 30 degrees to each house. And in this case, we've got a 26 degrees ascendant. And so the first house is only then 4 degrees of Leo and 26 degrees of Virgo, okay? Because she's asking about her 8th house, which has Saturn located in it, and Saturn is 4 degrees into the sign of Aries, but the 8th house starts at 26 degrees Pisces. So then you've got to go 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So that takes you to the end of the sign of Pisces, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you get to the Saturn. Okay. Now they've got North Node 29 degrees into Capricorn in their second house, Mars retrograde in the sign of Libra in the second house, Chiron retrograde in Scorpio in the third house, Pluto Sagittarius in the fourth. Fifth is empty. The sixth house has Neptune 28 degrees Capricorn, 5 degrees Aquarius Jupiter, 5 degrees Aquarius Uranus, 8 degrees Aquarius Mercury, 14 degrees Venus Aquarius, 26 degrees Aquarius the Sun. So she's got 6 planets in her sixth house. The sixth house is packed. The seventh is empty, and it's mostly in the sign of Pisces. Then the eighth house, a little bit of Pisces, predominantly in Aries, with the Saturn located, which is what she's asking about. The ninth house, the MC's 14 degrees Taurus, and the moon is 0 degrees Gemini in the 10th house, because the 10th house starts with a few degrees of Taurus, so the last, because it starts at 26 degrees Taurus, so there's only 4 degrees left of Taurus, and then bing, we get into Gemini, and her moon is located there. And then the 11th house, 12th house, and 1st house are empty. So her 5 empty houses are 11, 12, 1, 5, and 7, and the 9th. But that's got the MC in it. So I hope that now, and looking at the chart, we've got a kite. So we've got the moon is trine to Mars and trine to the stellium of planets that's in the 6th. And then making the top of the kite, Mars is trine to Pluto. Mars is sextile to Pluto, and Pluto is sextile to everything that's in quite a lot of the planets that are in the 6th, because they're all in Aquarius. So she's got an upside down kite, but she's got a large trine, and the moon unites it. So the moon makes bazillions of aspects: moon trine Mercury, moon trine Mars, moon trine Jupiter, moon sextile Saturn, moon trine to Uranus, moon trine to Neptune, opposition Pluto, moon opposition Pluto, moon trine to North Node, moon square to Ascendant. Is it? Moon square to Ascendant. Why is that? Oh, because it's only a few degrees. Okay, the Ascendant's 26. Okay, it's a maths thing. It's out of sign. The Sun doesn't make many aspects. The Sun's square to the Moon. However, the Sun's Aquarius and the Moon is 0 degrees Gemini, so I wouldn't worry about that being as a square. It's a mathematical square because it's sort of reading it like a late degree Taurus. But I wouldn't say that that's an issue because they're both in air signs. We've got to remember the signs that things are in. Yeah, mathematically. And the Sun is squared to Pluto. Pluto's 5 degrees Saggy, and the Sun is 26 Aquarius. But again, it's sort of reading it like it's Pisces. But boom, don't worry about that. So there we go. We've got Saturn natally in the sign of Aries in the 8th house. So this is the issue that we need to solve. Now I'm going to start off by reading a quote from the lovely Erin Sullivan's book. She wrote some fabulous books, and she was an absolutely wonderful astrologer, and I feel so honoured that I managed to interview her before her passing. If you want to listen to that interview, it's in episode 50. So this book, I don't even know if it's still available. I doubt it, because it's definitely out of print. It's called Saturn in Transit, Boundaries of Mind, Body and Soul. And she wrote it in, first published in 1991. And I've got a first edition of it. It's lovely. So because we're talking about Saturn, Saturn's a heavy-duty planet. It's not fluffy, I'd be lying if I said Saturn and anything that happens with Saturn is fluffy. It isn't. And just from my own experience, I'm having Saturn transiting past my sun's sign. It's not quite so acute at the moment, but it was pretty horrible last year. Won't go into details, but Saturn transits aren't fun. And they're not supposed to be, because Saturn is the planet that gives us life lessons. Now, whether or not we take those lessons is a different thing altogether, or even if we listen to them. And I just want to read this bit that will help anyone that is going through a challenging time at the moment. And I like what she says in this bit. So I'm on page 99. Heroic modalities, the astrological hero. Although made up of the same stuff, we're organised in unique ways, which accounts for our capacity for empathy with other people, even though we cannot actually partake in their experience. Circumstances are also somewhat finite, in the sense that if something can happen to one person, it could happen to another, no matter how bizarre or unlikely it may seem. In this way, certain generalizations can be made about astrological signatures. A major life test is not something that one always volunteers for, but major life tests arise whether we like them or not. These need not be events or circumstances only, but can easily take the form of a sudden shift in perspective. Some types of person are more resistant to change than others. Some seem geared to crisis of one kind or another, and others seem positively addicted to cliffhanging. As previously mentioned, having all within us the astrological signs and our horoscopes, each containing all the planets, we have all the components of the astrological expressions in our psyches. That we have particular emphasis in one or other area of the chart, or in one or other aspect, or in a particular sign, indicates that there are certain factors that need to have disproportionate weight in decision making. That's weight, W-E-I-G-H-T. To outline precisely how one individual is going to respond to a call to adventure or challenge from within or without is impossible. One way of approaching the problem is to consider that the grouping of planets and emphasis of signs is like a psychic board of directors, some of whom are less influential at certain times than others. There's always a meeting going on, and there are always power struggles between the various board members, each vying for control. It's important to recognise that even the weakest or the least experienced function in the psyche can rise to ascendancy in the right atmosphere or under the proper conditions. Indeed, the rising of an inferior function is often necessary during a time of testing. It's likely that it needs development and is in fact the urgent component in change that is being unconsciously recommended. If there is a crisis or call to adventure, there'll be a meeting of the board and a struggle will take place. The various representatives in the horoscope will attempt to make themselves heard and present their case. The cases that are presented are biased towards their own realms of power, so the moon will want to cry, the sun will want to dominate, Mercury will apply all the tricks to engage in meaningless and frustrating inner dialogue, Mars will want to attack, Venus will want to mediate, Jupiter will want to adjudicate and arbitrate, and Saturn will want to swallow everyone else. Uranus will call for revolution, Neptune will want to avoid or spiritualize, and Pluto will cry, off with their heads. Obviously, a balance of sorts must be struck. Let chaos reign for a while, then start to listen carefully to these members of the board, all of whom have valid points of view. Which of them is the most appropriate voice in the given circumstances? First, it must be determined logically what the challenge is and what the practical ramifications of such a call to adventure are for one's life. Then the possibility must be considered that a prominent member of the board of directors has become redundant and must be replaced by a more currently effective energy force. A new situation has arisen within the call, which must therefore be dealt with in an unaccustomed fashion. With this in mind, it's understandable why we become confused and angry when faced with a situation that we think we did not bring on ourselves. The truth of the matter is we did bring it on ourselves, or rather ourself with a capital S, brought it into our consciousness. To counteract depression during a major crisis, action must be taken immediately. Effective action. In assessing the effectiveness of one action over another, we must be very careful to examine the internal state of affairs. Seizing control or claiming power during a time of crisis does not always mean direct action, but it does mean collaborating actively with various members of the board. Coming to terms with a call to adventure will mean altering the perspectives that have held true for the entire previous phase. In order to effect this, we must let go of old models and make room for the psyche to bring forth new alternatives. The three qualities or modes in astrology, cardinal, fixed and mutable, are descriptive of the impulse for action. All three contain each of the four elements, fire, earth, air and water, which are related to the psychological leitmotif or theme, which is expressed through the mode. What follows is the essence of that response that each of the qualities or modes makes when faced with sudden or imminent challenge. Now, obviously, because this is a copyright book, there's a limit to how much I can read out without breaking copyright, and even though Erin is in heaven, that's beside the point. But she divides the next sections up into cardinal, fixed and mutable. So with Lion being Lion being a sun sign Aquarius, I'm just going to read the advice that she gives if you're a fixed sign, because she says the fixed signs, she heads up it, reluctant heroes, whilst the cardinal signs, she says, are willing heroes, and the mutable signs are, what did she say, mutable signs are the hopeful heroes. Okay, so this is how Aquarius will deal with sudden change. The fallacy that Aquarius is free and easy is still being perpetrated. This, of all the fixed signs, is least likely to respond willingly and freely to an external demand for change. The concession for change must come from within, or the reluctant hero will balk and fight himself. All calls to adventure are specifically designed to challenge whatever is the most resistant factor in the sign. Aquarius prefers to initiate changes, not respond to them. Reluctantly, there's a realization that effort must be applied to step forward and to explore new horizons. Though we often think of Aquarius as being out of its mind, it really is not out of its mind enough and spends far too much time in the world of imagination. A hard challenge will test that imagination and bring it into reality. A refusal to take on the challenge willingly will result in a crystallized state of mind with an anachronistic frame of reference. A realized and accepted call brings out the fascinating and original aspect of Aquarius, breathing new life into the mind of creation. The unexpected, though fantasized as being wonderful, also throws a fixed sign off tack, but it can then establish a new and more relevant status quo. Now, I myself have a fixed sign ascendant, but the transit that I had with Saturn going past sun sign was a mutable sign, so yeah, mutables are no good with that sort of thing. Now, Lion does have a Leo ascendant as well. There's quite a lot of fixed in their chart, so their ascendants, fire, they've got that cluster of 5 planets. Is it 1, 2, 3? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 5 planets in fixed because the Neptune's in cardinal. The MC is fixed and Chiron is fixed. They've also got cardinal and mutable in the chart, so cardinals, but they don't have any water in their chart at all. The only planet that's water is Chiron, which is in the 3rd house, retrograde in the sign of Scorpio. So we have to remember that the water signs find it, inverted commas, easier to be emotional about things, whilst the fire wants to get out there and do it, air wants to talk about it, earth wants to sit down and have dinner. Yeah. So what does Erin say about Saturn return? So she says here, the first stage of the Saturn return marks a time of separation and definition of the quality of the emotional life. There's an urgency to this time, a feeling that one must now sort things out. By this time, Saturn has made all possible aspects and shaped and formed the principles that each planet, house and sign represent in the birth chart, because it's been all the way around the zodiac and all through all the houses. Society and family have provided a vehicle by which to express one's social values, but at the Saturn return this can appear meaningless, for it's time to revise one's inner values. Now, the thing to consider with a Saturn return, it's not just the fact that it's going to return, it's also going to aspect what it was aspecting when you were born. So in Lion's case, she has Saturn directly opposite Mars, so Saturn's 4 degrees Aries in the 8th house, and Mars is retrograde Libra in the 2nd house, 5 degrees Libra. So they're in direct opposition. No two ways about it here. And we also have to remember that the 2nd and the 8th are money houses. So the 2nd house is our attitude towards money. It's not about self-value. That's a modern interpretation. Donna Cunningham would moan about that. So Mars retrograde in Libra in the 2nd, needing to earn money in a responsible, valuable way, so people's other things are considered, because Libra is a very considerate sign, but retrograde in an individual way. And Mars isn't particularly happy in the sign of Libra because it's just its opposite, because Mars is happier being in the sign of Aries. So we have got an opposite ruler thing. So it's not that both planets are rulers are in opposite signs, but just one of them is. So Mars is in Libra retrograde and Saturn is in Aries. So Aries is the ruler to Mars, but it's got this opposition to Saturn. And so the 8th is other people's money and investments. The 2nd is the money that we earn ourselves. So it could be, just talking off the top of my head now, that you could get to a Saturn return, 8th house, pinging to 2nd, that there some distant relative dies and leaves you some money. Now, I have seen that happen, but it doesn't mean to say that's going to happen to everybody. The other aspect that Saturn makes, so it makes a nice, makes a sextile to the moon, and it also makes bazillions of aspects. So Saturn sextile to the Sun, sextile to Mercury, opposition to Mars, sextile to Jupiter. It's also sextile to Uranus and trine to Pluto. So Saturn's got a lot going on for it. It's not like it's a singleton planet and it's like it's all on its own. There's quite a lot of conversation going on in the chart anyway. And this is the thing to remember, that when we're considering a transit will always trigger what we have natally as well. So it's important to, which I haven't got time to go into the podcast today, but to consider all the other aspects, Lion, that you've got in your chart that your Saturn is making, because when it returns, it won't just be Saturn that's happening. It'll ping to all the other planets in your chart. Okay, does that make sense? Right. Now, Lion has said 8th house Saturn return. Is it always doom and gloom, are people dying, or can it be rebirth and death within oneself as well? Now, this is what Erin is saying. So we're now reading page 240. So this is Saturn in transit. So before it was just that how to deal with things when they come up. Have a little chat with your board and see which, who's going to be the dominant planet and how to reconcile it. So we've got 8th house now, and she calls it metamorphosis. The 8th house requires that we undergo a ritual purging in order to prepare ourselves for the inevitable. It's not necessary to die in a literal sense, but it's a phase through which we must pass in order to move on to philosophical reconciliation of opposites. Then she quotes a little bit of the Greek myths, which I won't go into because I haven't talked about Greek myths and I'm not anyway, I'm not an expert on them. And then she says, when opposite forces encounter each other, an impasse is reached, rendering everything quiescent until a transformation occurs. There's no true union unless both or all parts are changed forever. Then she tells a story about a lady who had her sun ruler, Venus, in Scorpio and Mercury in the 8th house. So that's somebody that had Venus and Mercury in the 8th. And then Saturn moved into her 8th and conjoined Venus. And the lady herself said all hell broke loose. Now, this is somebody else's experience, which isn't going to relate in Lion's case. She said it's not events themselves which are important while Saturn transits the 8th house, but the way in which we deal with them. Saturn puts a stop to superficial mannerisms when it's in Pluto's house. The 8th house is the midpoint in this final phase of the heroic journey, and a metamorphosis occurs which marks a death from the past. The combination of the Grim Reaper archetype of Saturn and Hades, the unseen one, is not a pleasant image. However, it is only through the death cycle that rebirth is possible. A rather light-hearted slogan comes to mind. Everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. Sometimes we meet our darkest fears and leave them behind during this phase. And then she quotes another Greek myth and a little bit of Freud. And she ends with, the amalgamation of one's resources with another's or commitment to a corporate or collective resource pool could prove to be extremely limiting during Saturn's transit of the 8th house. If such possibilities seem to exist, it's best to be cautious and exacting with a close examination of every party's motives. It's not necessarily a negative time for such investments, but they will inevitably turn out to be a lesson of one kind or another. What I was saying earlier about investments, so if you have any investments, then sort of keep an eye on them. She also talks about the 8th house being about sexuality. So she says it's certainly not a time to conducive to casual sex. So obviously, yeah, I don't need to expand on that. Now, in Marion DeMarch's and Joan McKever's The Only Way to Learn About Tomorrow, they say about Saturn returns. So Saturn's first return to its birthplace is considered very significant. It can be a time of crisis because Saturn, planet of discipline, may force you to look at what you've done with your life thus far and evaluate what you wish to do with it from this point on. It may be a time of revelation when, for the first time in your life, you feel really grown up and able to stand on your own 2 feet. It could be the year when you decide you're ready to take on some additional responsibilities. We have a slew of clients who become pregnant or have had their first child at the time of their Saturn return. Yeah, I've seen that happen as well. She goes on, since Saturn fosters ambition and organisation, you'll try to develop its potential to the fullest and then act in a practical and solid manner. Saturn's well-sown seeds will be reaped in a conventional business-like way, and then you can reassess your needs and patiently start all over. Now, I just want to add in there about, this is from the House Connection, How to Read the Houses in Astrological Chart by Karen Hanmaker-Zondag, that we're just considering the 8th house here, but we also can take into account the ruler of where's the ruler to Saturn. So Saturn's located in the 8th. The 6th house starts in the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn's the ruler to the 6th house, even though there's a hell of a lot of Aquarius planets there, but there's one in Capricorn. So the ruler to the 6th is in the 8th. So she's talking about the connection between the 6th and the 8th house. She says people with the ruler of the 6th in the 8th often find work in the terrain of the 8th house, work they do with dedication and with great intensity, and that frequently brings problems to light or demands digging and seeking. It can even be work involving power or finance, which will always come under the 8th house as well. So we need to take that into account too, I think. So what's Saturn like in the sign of Aries? So this I'm quoting from the Zodiac program that I had millions of years ago, which doesn't function anymore. And he says, the guy that wrote this, achievements and problems, Saturn in Aries. Aryan impetuosity and irresponsibility don't sit wonderfully with harsh Saturnian reality, but it does mean that there's a feeling that whatever order you end up with will have been created by you and not others. Because we need to keep in mind what Aries isn't about us. Aries is about me, so to speak. So it's like the person, it's not the collective. Aquarius is a very collective energy, which is Lion sun sign. But Saturn, when it goes into Aries, is impetuosity and irresponsibility, are the things that are difficult. So wanting to accept responsibility for something is going to be harder under an Aries energy. Not to say that it's impossible, but hey, there we go. And going on to Saturn in the 8th house. So this is planets and houses now. The combination of Saturn's stern and uncompromising realistic view of life and the 8th house concern with the deep and dark is generally seen as giving you a predisposition to be a fairly serious sort, possibly given to brooding on things a little too much. Plenty of astrologers seem to be a bit gloomy about your sex life, but I don't see the problem myself, although you can use it as an excuse for practice if you need an excuse. Now, he always wrote these things very tongue-in-cheek. I don't know, he only wrote them for that one computer program, but yeah. So maybe your sex life is a bit more serious, but we also need to consider that the 8th house is investments and other people's money, and it can be inheritance. So the 8th house is money that comes from others, not money that we have ourselves. What we earn ourselves is our 2nd house. The energy that we put into it is the money that we get is the 2nd. Now, I know that you've mentioned in your message to me about it retrograding, but I thought I'd get up a transit rhythmogram and see when Saturn actually returns. And yes, it's going to go into the sign of Aries and then it's going to retrograde, but we have to consider whether or not that retrograde, does it mean anything? So what I've got here on the transit rhythmogram, which again I will put on the show notes and again I will read out to you. So a transit rhythmogram is Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. They're horizontal lines in a diagram, and each one of those lines, so Jupiter's at the bottom in a blue line, Saturn's the next one up, which is yellow, Uranus is the next one up, which is green, Neptune's the next one up, which is aquamarine, and Pluto's at the top as a purple line. And then underneath are written the months of the year, so from January all the way to December for each year. I mean, this transit rhythmogram always does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it takes us up from 25 to 29. And then the way you look at it is you look from left to right and you see there's little symbols that are written for each month. So we've got the Saturn return. The exact Saturn return happens in March 2026. So let me just go to the ephemeris for March 2026 and double check. So we've got Saturn is 4 degrees Aries, March 2026. Yes, it's in March, because March would be 4 degrees into the sign of Aries on the 10th of March 2026. So the transit rhythmogram is perfectly correct. I don't think the retrograde's going to make a difference. I don't think it's going to affect you. I think it's going to affect Pisces, actually, of which I am. So when are you saying that it retrogrades? Saturn goes all the way back, so it must be in 25. I don't see how that's going to affect you. Saturn is in Pisces and does go into Aries on the 26th of May this year, but yeah, it goes retrograde on the 13th of July and it's only 1 degree. So we haven't got a conjunction, and it goes all the way back to 0 and ends the year 25 degrees into Pisces. I don't think that's an issue. I mean, yes, it's getting near and it's edging its way, and it will be in your 8th house. But from my personal experience, Saturn doesn't really do much until it's actually exact, because it's yeah. Now that would be different if it went 4 degrees into the sign of Aries and then started retrograding the minute it got back. Or it went 4 degrees Aries and then went forward to something like 6 degrees and then retrograded back again. That would be an absolute bummer. But you haven't got that. So forget the retrograde. It's not going to do anything because you haven't got anything even in opposition apart from your North Node, which is 29 degrees Virgo. So maybe it's doing something about that. But your North Node's in your second house of money. You need to make a decision about astrology, whether or not you want to do more of it. Okay, one last quote. We've got Astrology for Dummies, and this is the first edition by Ray Ryan. And what does she say about Saturn in the 8th house? You have great psychological insight. Your challenge is to overcome your fear of death and to face your sexual issues, which can range anywhere from mild inhibition to emotionless promiscuity. I know the second one's not the case. Also, you're both cautious and skilled in making money, which is a good thing because the chances are you'll marry someone who has financial problems. Oh, please don't take that as a given. Sometimes people make funny little off-the-cuff remarks. But yeah, that's ignore that. So in summary, I think you can prepare for this first Saturn return of yours by making sure that your finances, then this is what you could do for yourself, that your finances are stable and you're not planning on changing your job or do anything drastic with any investments or finances or bank accounts you've got. When it comes to that exact return, which is in May next year, then I can't tell you what's going to happen because I don't know. What I do know is that whatever it is that's going to happen is going to happen in May 2026, for this is your first Saturn return. Now, just to add in there, because you've got that Mars opposition. Now, Mars opposition to Saturn, so again, this is Ray Orion. She says there that hot-blooded Mars is the planet of action, sombre Saturn is the lord of caution. They don't much like each other, but they can work together. Now, you've got an opposition, which she calls a hard aspect. Impatience does you in. You feel blocked and frustrated, and it's not easy for you to regulate your moods. Plus, you may feel that you have enemies and run-ins with authority, all too common in your life, and may keep you wound up. So I do know that you can get worked up about certain things, political things this is. However, there's nothing that we can do about politics unless we write to our MPs. But Mars is where we get our energy from. So don't debilitate your own energy by overly concerning yourself with things that you cannot make an immediate change to. Awareness is good, but getting yourself worked up about certain things obviously won't help you. So that's just a little tip there. So we've got the Saturn return coming up. So Saturn return is when we grow up, when we learn to be an adult. The 8th house is sex, birth, death, reincarnation, etc. It isn't your own death. I'm not going to go into that. I've done bazillions of episodes talking about people that have actually passed, and it's pretty rare, but not impossible, for people to pass during a Saturn transit, which isn't the same as a Saturn return. Now, if everybody died on their Saturn return, there'd be nobody left on the planet. So that obviously is not going to be the case. But we also need to take into account that Neptune is going to transit as well. So you're not just going to have Saturn returning because you natally well, not because of you natally, but Neptune's just about to change sign into Aries as well. So you're also going to have a conjunction with that. And that's going to last for quite a while because Neptune goes into into Aries and then does a bit of a retrograde and whatever. And then by the time we get to next year, Neptune's going to be 4 degrees into the sign of Aries on the 30th of May. So just after you have your Saturn return, you're then going to have a lengthy Neptune connection. And there we go, that's what I was talking about earlier. There is a retrograde, so it goes to exactly 4 degrees and then 25 minutes, and that's the 7th of July. So luckily this doesn't happen with Saturn, but it happens with Neptune. And Neptune stays 4 degrees and then goes back. So it starts retrograding on the 7th of July at 4 degrees, okay, the exact degree of your natal Saturn. Neptune goes back all the way to 3 degrees, 2 degrees. What does it finish? When does it finish retrograding? Doesn't go direct until the 13th of December. So I would have thought, rather than your Saturn return being an issue, I would be more inclined to say that Neptune might be the issue. So I would advise you about investments, etc. So when sometimes you get those ridiculous things where you think the bank is phoning you and asking you to declare this, that and the other, just watch for deception, because Neptune is the planet of deception. It's now going to be transiting through your 8th house, makes an exact conjunction to your natal Saturn. My advice would, rather than the Saturn return, I would be far more aware of that Neptune conjunction to it, and it goes retrograde as well. So being very, very careful about your finances and the people close to you as well, their finances as well, so they're not getting caught up by hoaxes and things. So be aware of that. I would have thought that would be more important, because it's a lengthier thing. The Saturn thing's very brief. Boom, Saturn return, junk, and it carries on. It just goes on through the sign of Aries. That earlier retrograde, not going to do anything. But I would be more urging you, Lion, to look at that Neptune thing. And again, don't get worried about it, because it's very, very easy when you first get into astrology to concern yourself about upcoming things. Mind you, I've been into astrology for years, and I was quite concerned about my Saturn transiting the sun sign, because I'd had something awful happen before. And so yes, I can understand the worries to it, but we have to tackle things in a different way, because we know what the energy of the planets are like and which house it's in. Then it makes sense, and then we can do something about it. So going back to what Erin was saying earlier, so in your case, it's you are a fixed sign yourself, but your Saturn is in a cardinal sign, so it has to be done uniquely to you, to the cardinal sign. It's not about doing the same as what everybody else has done. So I hope I haven't gone into too much detail there, and I hope that's helped. If you've got a specific question about your chart that you'd like me to cover on the podcast, then please do get in contact. It's mary@maryenglish.co.uk, and I hope you have a fab week. Bye bye now.